It affects and infects us in what we think about what's going on, what we're told about what's going on around the world. Let me give you an example that will reinforce my answer. In every newsroom at the beginning of the day, there's a person who's called an assignment editor. They come in at sunup, and they look at mail that has come in, and they look at the wire services and the internet, and they look at the barrage of television screens. And between that, they begin to assemble the assignment schedule for the day. What's going to be covered, and who is going to cover it as the reporters come in. I've been through this. So when you show up for work, your first stop is the assignment desk. And they say, Noble, you're going to go here. This is who's going to be representing the mayor, and this is who you'll be talking to, that kind of stuff. Later on in the morning, the assignment editor meets with the producers and the writers, and they sit and they talk over an oval table about the assignments and what's going to be on the evening news. And they make their comments. Well, we're going to cover that story again. I mean, we've already given that story. No, let's move it down, or let's shave it to just a 30-second voiceover. Overwhelmingly, the people who make these decisions are neither black, nor brown, nor red, nor yellow. And they're talking about coverage of a world that is, for the most part, black, brown, red, and yellow. On a network level, it's even more severe because you have these news bureaus all around the world who are controlled and captained and run by people who are neither black, brown, red, or yellow, who determine what the reporters in these bureaus go and cover. And when they bring back the report, then it is wired into the newsrooms and the head offices here in New York City, and then they decide to what's going to be laid in. Now, mind you, the network newscast is a half hour. They've got about 7 or 8 bureaus around the world, not to mention a dozen or so in the United States. All of this information is coming into this narrow funnel. Who determines not only what gets in the funnel, but all that extra stuff that doesn't? And what I'm saying is that the people who make that decision are neither black, nor brown, nor red, nor yellow, or have they had any educational background that tells the truth about the people who are black, or brown, or red, or yellow. So there's a presumption that we're getting the skinny on what happened today. That's not so.
Misinformation instead.
Yes, I think misinformation is indeed a weapon of mass destruction.
And then, of course, there is the issue of self-perceptions, and another issue pertaining to the perceptions of others based on this misinformation.
Exactly. I mean, I went through school, and I was proud that I was able to commit to memory the Gettysburg Address. 77 years ago, our forefathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. All?
Yes. And what about the word men?
Huh?
What about the word men?
There you go. There
yes.
you go. But I swallowed that. And it's burned in my brain, all of us. Proud of it. Never once was it questioned, Never once do we really focus on the beginnings of this country. And there's a woman now who I've given a lot of attention to because I think her thesis is right, Dr. Joy Leary. And she's been talking about the long-lasting impact of the slave experience on the victims of that, post-traumatic slave syndrome. I think that that's something that needs to be really looked at, and white people, as well as black, need to look at that before there's any help. So, the journalist has a lot of legwork, preparatory legwork, in order to really fulfill the precepts of effective journalism. And it's not happening in my judgment.
Welcome to the Gilchrist Experience. That's my hero. The only reason I sit here today is because of Gil Noble and what he presented to us as a people. Right, Cinque?
Yep.
You were
Yep.
close to all that.
Yeah, definitely.
You
I
had the
knew-
people,
Mhm.
your family were,
Yeah,
were
and
part
I
of
knew,
all
I
that.
knew Gil very well. You
Now,
know what I mean?
I forgot to mention, he sent me this piece here.
Yeah, yeah.
So I dug
Yeah.
it up when it
Mhm.
we're talking about the media and people in the media
Mhm.
and all our heroes.
Yeah.
Now,
And
we just
we're
went through a
losing a
couple
lot of heroes today.
oh,
We're losing a lot in 2023. We're not halfway at the year yet, but it seems like there's so many funerals. I personally have been to 4 funerals in 9 days. But I can say that only one of them was a young person. Everybody else had at least gotten in 75 years.
ooh,
But,
yeah.
you know, when an elder dies, they say a library, it's like a library being burned down.
Oh,
So,
Yeah.
you know, that's an African proverb. And,
Yeah.
you know, we had Out in Maddox, you know. There's another gentleman that I mentioned earlier. His name is Charles Wilson. He used to do the show, The Communicators, with Brother Leroy Baylor and I. He was 92 years old. I had no idea he was that old. My Uncle Kwame Brathwaite was 85.
yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
Alton almost made 80. You know,
Oh,
what was I think he was 70. Alton Maddox was about
70
77.
77.
Yeah,
He
77.
was that young?
Yeah, that young, right? You
Yeah.
say, yeah. I mean,
It's,
but we're just losing so many people. I mean, and of course we lost the Harry Belafonte, but I mean,
But
he
that's
was
96.
Yeah, that's such a
Oh,
full
man.
life. Sometimes when you hear those sort of ages, you can't really mourn. You can just celebrate their life. It's sort of
Yeah.
a difference.
Harry,
know.
Harry lived it, man.
Yeah, unlike, most of those funerals, as I said, I went to only with one person who was young, a friend of mine, had an accident in his home, and he hit his head, and he was out of here. You know, he had just made a little over 50, so that was a sad funeral for many people who attended, though. But so they say when it rains, it pours, and it's been pouring a lot lately.
What do you think about what Gil talked about, how we should act as journalists and how we were raised to believe in the truth of the Constitution?
Yeah, I mean, I
And-
think Gil was 100% on point. Like he talks about the irony and the contradictions in these documents and
Yeah.
these things that we're indoctrinated with through school, and how they're really just false. They're just words. They really don't have any integrity behind them, from the world that we live in and what we experience in a day. And a lot of times people who have, they're depicted in a light which makes them, when they speak truth to power, it makes them seem like an outcast, and luckily we have people like you, we have people like Graham, who are constantly on the airways bringing people a different side, a different perspective, some truth, firsthand accounts, that they might not normally get, for people's lives and situations that happen that, other people might not get access to watching MSNBC or CNN. They might have some other stories, but locally, talking about our community, they usually don't have people who can make those sort of connections and tell those sort of truths, those
But
uncomfortable truths.
our heroes seem to follow the truth to the T.
Oh yeah,
Like Gil,
a lot of-
I mean,
yeah.
he was brainwashed,
Yeah,
and I
he
was
was-
brainwashed when I went into the military. I mean,
Yeah.
I was a gun-home Marine.
But the beauty of it is coming out of that and talking
Yeah.
about how when you come into the truth and the light and you start to make it so that you're just following the truth, where you're not really giving much credence to the fact that your truth may be uncomfortable for others. You're going for what your sources and what your information deems for you to be the truth.
But we have these elders in our lives that always spoke the truth
Yeah, definitely.
and didn't get compromised or disappointed. Because
Indeed.
of the downfall when you, and really try to follow the rules, and then you
Yes.
find out that everything's hypocritical,
Oh yeah.
especially today.
Especially today. I mean, we're even seeing one of the biggest things that happened. People look at Tucker Carlson. He's been the face of Fox News.
Yeah.
And as everybody, well, not everybody know, people who watch Fox News don't know, but Dominion and Fox News, quote unquote, settled out of court for basically a little over a quarter of a over $750 million, close to
$787 million.
close to $800 million.
Yeah.
Rounded off, we're talking $1 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it they felt like came because their lead personality, Tucker Carlson, in text messages, they didn't really want that coming out through discovery, and it would be a lot of embarrassment. And they
Yeah.
said, listen, we got about 12 billion in the coffers. Let's give up this, you know, because they didn't want that. And right now they're fighting because the next company that's suing them, Smartmatic, said we're not gonna settle. We want the full discovery of all these things that come through. You know, it's not about the money for us. It's about the truth being put out to the people. So that's a big deal that a lot of people are looking forward to. But Tucker Carlson, the irony is that they talked about Trump supporters. Some of his text messages were revealed, and they talked about a group of white men who were Trump supporters beating a guy who they considered Antifa. He said he doesn't know what, and he said this is not how white men do. And of course, that's contrary to what we've experienced as people of African descent throughout the United States and the diaspora in terms of being ganged up on and jumped and this sort of thing. So Carlson was rebuking that in the text messages, these Trump supporters beating on this guy who they suspected was Antifa. And he said that's not, you know, he doesn't really want to push that. Or he said that he thought that Trump was a dummy, basically. He was tired of him and all of these sort of things. But getting rid of him, ultimately, I don't think solves the fact that discovery, it's out there now, and how they feel about their viewers. It's a total opposite of how you feel about people who watch your show, who call in and speak to you. It's about respect for them. It's not about lying to them, where you have a whole network that has way more resources and money than you probably could dream of. And then and their paradigm is the opposite. Lie to people and tell them what they want to hear. And that's where we're at today with these things. It's amazing.
All right. Before we have you on, Graham, I want to run this piece that we did several years ago, 2007. I think it's item number, which item? 3. We're going backwards. Run number 3 for us. And we'll be right to you, Graham. You're going to enjoy this. You as a younger man.
Again, my name is Weatherspoon, and this is the Gilchrist Experience. I am very pleased to be sitting in the presence of an illuminary, a Juris Doctorate who has no peers, in my opinion, an old friend, a good friend, none other than attorney at war, Alton Mass.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Maybe
Thank
I
you.
should rest my case right now. After that great introduction.
Let me tell you, we've been trying to get to you for a long time, man. This is going to be an hour well spent.
Absolutely.
I like to go back to the early days,
Okay.
to Little Alton in
All
Georgia,
right. All right.
and get a little background on. You're a preacher's kid, right?
Yeah. Right.
Give us a little background on the early days of your life before we fast forward.
Okay. Well, actually, I was really born in Michigan, and so I spent the first early days there. My mother was a teacher, and through her logic, she concluded that I would be better off going to school in the South. And, of course, it was segregated, and this was Brown versus Board of Education. And so most of the buildings, they were very dilapidated. There was no indoor plumbing. There was no janitorial service. There was no cafeterias. Any of the things that are commonly associated with elementary school. But I think that my mother had the insight to recognize that the key ingredient in education was love. And obviously she felt as though that the kind of love that I would get in the schools in the South was far superior than the education I would have received in Michigan. So we moved back to Georgia, Jim Crow, Georgia, and that's where I remained until about the 6th grade. I went up to Dayton, Ohio for a couple of years, and then I came back to Georgia, and then I graduated from high school in Cuyahoga County, Georgia.
Okay. Now, what prompted you to study law? Who or what prompted you to study law?
Well, you know, the interesting thing about growing up in the rural South, I lived in the county adjacent to Fulton County, where Atlanta is located. And back in the 50s, there was not that much entertainment. I mean, there was no, you know, I mean, television was just coming out, you know, in the South. I mean, maybe like 51, 52. And, you know, it was very embryonic, you know, it wasn't developed at all, you know, really. You know, you rarely saw a black person on television, you know, maybe Amos and Andy, you know.
Yeah,
right, you know, right, you know.
Well,
and,
I don't know.
Right, yeah. So, you know, it was, so really, people had to make their own entertainment, really. And, you know, on Sundays, after church, people would, you know, go through there, you know, spill, eat at somebody's house, usually my grandparents' house. But beyond that, there was a lot of storytelling. And then often there would be cases in which a black person was accused of some crime involving a white person as the alleged victim. And in some of those cases, people actually went to Atlanta to get a lawyer, you know, because they clearly knew that the white lawyers in the county were too closely associated with the courthouse. And so they went to Atlanta. And basically, I remember in the 50s, a lawyer by the name of Donald Hollowell, who, in fact, I think made his transition last year. I happened to see him actually before he made it, you know, in Atlanta. But he was somewhat legendary, you know, and I remember a particular case, a person lived across the street from me who had worked for a white grocer, and he had made his runs and then went home thinking that he'd get an hour's sleep and then run back to the grocery store and do some other deliveries. As it turned out, he just overslept. And this was a Saturday, it was a busy day, and people called us, "Where's my grocery?" You know, and he was asleep. And so when he got back, the owner of the store, you know, and him got into some struggles, and then the son of the owner got into the struggle, and as a result of that, racial epithets, you know, words changed, and then him being outnumbered, he pulled out his a knife and went to work, you know. And I would imagine that if most people who really did not know of the South and the fact that it wasn't monolithic in what happens, you know, you would say, well, I know that brother got lynched, you know, right off the bat, you know.
Is that the cut?
Interesting.
Yeah. Who was that handsome brother next to Alton, that handsome young guy?
Some old man. He's an old man now.
He's an old man now?
He's an old man. I think he's in his...
Smooth. I thought that was
what are you, 74
I thought that was
now,
the new Shaft or somebody right there.
74. Were you 74 now?
I'm getting there,
70?
Yeah,
74. Oh, I have an announcement. Last Thursday, I turned 81.
All
82.
Right. 82. I'm about to correct you on your own birthday. I'm like, you went back in time.
That's right. 82. It's all right.
Yeah.
Rescoring 10 and then some more.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to keep up with Harry. I'm going to 96 at least.
Yeah.
How's it feel,
You know,
having gone to his funeral Monday?
Oh,
His
man.
early beginnings
You know.
are a typical story of a true survivor. And look at what he became out of that early beginnings. You know, struggling
you know,
for his people, our people.
It's not where you are, it's where you're going.
Yeah.
And everybody, my old pastor, Johnny Ray Youngblood, used to say, everybody is born tabula rasa. That means you're born a blank slate.
Right.
You come into life butt naked. And people will write on your slate one thing or the other, and at some point in life, you may decide to erase what was taught or what you memorized when you obtain the truth, and then you rewrite on your slate and go from there. And speaking about truth earlier, truth is confrontational, as my pastor A.R. Bernard says. When you bring the truth, people don't want to hear it. It disrupts everything they've been thinking and have believed. So there will always be problems when people seek to present the truth. I thought of Melba Tolliver. I thought of Alma John on WWRL back in the day. People that inspired me. You know, Alma John I knew for many years, and she mentored me from elementary school. But I spent 8 months with Alton in Poughkeepsie. And I watched him every day. He was a tactician. There was no attorney I ever saw in criminal or Supreme Court that paralleled what he could do. People don't realize that he would labor till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning in preparation for the day's work. When he had Pagonis on the stand, Pagonis was ranting and raving, and Alton never looked at Stephen Pagonis.
You're talking about Tawana Brawley.
In the Brawley case, he said, and we've talked about this before on earlier shows, but he calmly said, you have to convince the jury that you're not crazy, and screaming like that. And Alton led him through the process and asked him if he had said something. I never said that. And Alton says to us, give me ledger number 4. And we hand it to him. He takes it over. He puts it, he doesn't look at Pagonis, he puts it in front of him and tells him, turn to page 837, paragraph 2, line 4. You know, everybody's like, what? And sure enough, when Pagonis read it, he shouts out an epitaph that I can't repeat. Then he apologizes to the judge in the court. And Alton said, you didn't say that? He said, oh, yes, I did. So he was always ready. He was the attorney at war. And he didn't go in to take a beating. He went in to give a beating. You know, it's like the old Timex. You take a licking and you keep on ticking. Well, if you could tick after Alton got through with you, you were lucky. But he was prepared. And he poured everything into what he had to do for that given day with the objective of winning a case. That's how he functioned. And he challenged lawyers. Not lawyers, but he challenged even the judges. When they seemed to get a little, what I'll call Alabama bound in their thinking, he told them, quite frankly, it's not going to be that way. And he had walked out of courts more than once and told them, it's not going to be that way because I know the law. And they had to back up. They had to back up. But we lost a great man. I've seen attorneys in other cases who reminded me of him, and in speaking to one, Fred Brewington, he said, Alton was my teacher. So I saw the technique of Alton in Fred Brewington as he handled the case for John White in Suffolk County.
You know, Graham, I was they had family member of Michael Stewart and Yusef Hawkins there. So I was surprised that it wasn't somebody from the Brawley family who was there in time.
Well, her father died about 1.5 years ago.
Okay.
I didn't know that her mother had passed. Her mother passed as well, along with her aunt.
Wow.
So I don't have contact with Tawana at this time. I know she lives in Virginia, but I don't have contact with her.
Got
And
it.
then we had Clemson, another one. We almost lost Clemson recently. He's very sick.
Yeah.
Utrice Lead, who was the first reporter to truly cover this case back in 86, 87. And she worked for the City Sun with Andy Cooper. And Utrice is struggling now, trying to recover. She's got cancer. So she had beaten it back a couple years ago, but it came back full force on her. And she's been homeless. So
Homeless.
she needs help. Yeah, she's been homeless. There's a GoFundMe page. You can go online, just type in Utrice, Eutrice, Lead, Leid, Leid, and you will see there's a GoFundMe page for her. But she was the sole reporter that stayed on this case from the inception. And she gave us news that the New York Times did not feel was fit to print. So,
or any of these
she's
other local papers.
Another warrior that is has been forgotten, but she's trying to hang in there.
Well, we're going to go to, we can always come back to Alton. I just want to go to our super elder, a man who lived to be 96 years old. That's what I'm striving for. 96. I mean, in my early days, I grew up with Harry de Belafonte. That was my hero. With
This
his
is my
Deo,
island in the sun,
Deo.
where my people have toiled since time begun.
Only black man in
All
the
my
movie.
days I'll sing in praise
All
of
right,
your
Graham.
forest waters.
You've had your 3 minutes. He's going to sing us a song, too. All right. Let's run item 1. Harry Belafonte, Deo, our first black star, movie star.
Role of Harry Belafonte. When is it? On March 1, 1927, Harry Belafonte entered the world as a famous American singer, actor, and activist. In the 1950s, he rose to fame as a Caribbean-American pop performer and popularized the Trinbagonian calypso musical style, which was based on Jamaican mento folk songs. His record Calypso, 1956, was the first LP by a single artist to sell 1 million copies. Songs from the blues, folk, gospel, and show tune canons, as well as American staples like the Banana Boat Song and Jump in the Line, were all recorded and performed brilliantly by Harry Belafonte. In addition to his role in Carmen Jones, 1954, he had leading roles in Island in the Sun, 1957, and Odds Against Tomorrow, 1959. During the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 1960s, Paul Robeson served as a mentor to him, and he was a close confidant of Martin Luther King Jr., a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador from 1987 until his death. He was a vocal supporter of many political and humanitarian causes, including the anti-apartheid movement and USA for Africa. He served as an ACLU celebrity spokesperson for juvenile justice issues and was a prominent opponent of Bush administration practices. After a long and successful career, Belafonte was honored with multiple awards, including 3 Grammys, including one for Lifetime Achievement, an Emmy, and a Tony, in addition to the Kennedy Center Honors, 1989, and the National Medal of Arts, 1994. He received both. In addition to becoming the oldest living person to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he also earned the Jan Herschelt Humanitarian Award at the 6th Annual Governor's Awards in 2014. After growing up in Jamaica, Belafonte moved back to New York and enlisted in the Navy during World War II. He graduated from George Washington High School. While working as a janitor's assistant in the 1940s, he was introduced to the performing arts by a tenant who gifted him 2 tickets to watch the American Negro Theater. Soon after, he joined the American Negro Theater and began studying acting at New York's prestigious dramatic workshop of the New School. He featured in the Broadway Revue 3 for Tonight with Gower Champion in 1955 and was nominated for a Tony for his work in the musical John Murray Anderson's Almanac, 1954. The funeral date for Harry Belafonte has not yet been announced. There was no information available regarding Harry Belafonte's funeral at the time this report was written. Thanks for watching.
I actually graduated from George Washington High School.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah,
Same.
that's right. Oh, high school. But, you know, those days were, you had to be that conservative,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because the only blacks you had out there were, you know, Toms.
Mm-hmm.
Amos and Andy, Stephen Fetcher. And I always looked at that and I said, I don't know anybody like that. All the people, I mean, the 50s were grand, I mean, in New York.
Right.
In New York in particular. I think that was an oasis for black people.
Mm-hmm.
I know that, you know, things that we did here, you couldn't do anywhere else. As far as freedom, job opportunities, mingling with so many different kind of people.
Right.
You could hop on a subway in the 40s and 50s and go out to Coney Island and see every race in existence, even back in those days.
Mm-hmm.
But I think even during segregation, we had the better part of freedom in America.
Where was Harry Belafonte born?
He was born in Harlem,
Harlem, that's what
Oh.
I thought it was
and
Brooklyn
he was
for some
raised
reason.
in Jamaica.
Well,
So he had
partially.
he had the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you get the black pride of Jamaican, you know, wanted to do better,
Mm-hmm.
and then we were brainwashed to think that black people couldn't do better.
Mm-hmm.
I know most of the Jamaicans in my neighborhood were. The one Jamaican, and this is the 40s.
Right.
He wasn't allowed to hang out with us.
Really?
He was, because he was going to school. You know, we weren't.
Yeah. Y'all wasn't going to
Seen-
school.
We were out there cutting up. But his brother, who hung out with us,
His brother was cutting up too then.
he cut up.
Okay.
Yeah, he didn't go to school. But the one,
You know, there's something that he did. He and Sidney Poitier,
Mm-hmm.
they put their money up.
oh yeah, right.
Unlike a lot of famous black
Yeah.
people today that have
63.
50 times as much money
Yeah.
as they had, but the two of them helped finance the voting rights project with Medgar Evers. And they had sent money down to Medgar the first time. It was wired and he never got it.
Wow.
So they said, we're going to make sure you get it. So Harry and Sidney Poitier flew south with the money. They flew with cash.
Okay.
It was a clandestine flight. They got off the plane. They got in a vehicle. And as the driver was getting ready to pull off, and this is true, a ring of lights went on around them. And the driver said, oh, that's the adversary. Well, I said, who is it? He said, it's a Klan. And he drove towards one vehicle and then turned and drove the entire circumference of the circle and made his way out of the airstrip. And they got the money to Medgar. These guys put their lives on the line. And you have people with far greater resources today in our community. And they're not doing a cut-picking thing. It's really a shame. But I met Harry Belafonte just once, and I was so honored to meet him, but even more so, it was at Yankee Stadium when Nelson and Winnie Mandela were here in New York. I was on the detail. So I got to meet the three of them, along with others. KRS-One was there as well. Malcolm Jamal Warner. But it was Harry that was one of the ardent people that pushed for the breakup of the apartheid system.
Mm.
So it wasn't about making money and having a house and a car and all those things. He also mentored a preacher I know and a reporter, former member of the Puerto Rican gang, Pablo Guzman, and oh man, I forgot his name, but they were members of the Puerto Rican Liberation Group that took over the church on Lexington Avenue years ago. But they had stayed, not Pablo, but this other brother, I can't remember his name.
You
They
might
had stayed in
mention.
close.
You might mention the March on Washington, 1963. People
That
don't
too, yes.
realize that Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier brought half of Hollywood to the March on Washington in 1963 and also financed it. People don't understand how big the March on Washington was.
Yeah.
How many Hollywood stars were there? And they came to liberate black people. So, you know, Harry was a strong part of that whole beginning, you know. So these are our leaders who pass on at 96 years old.
That's a full life. You know, what's funny is Graham mentioned Utrice Lead and her role in the case as a news person of that time. But I often wonder, you know, when Gil had been ABC so long, they eventually started to take away resources from him. So like it is, he was sort of running on his own. He eventually didn't have the aides and the personnel and everything like that. We see Don Lemon, who just was fired from CNN. Now, people could think what they want about Don Lemon as a journalist, that he wasn't great. But what's kind of irking is that they've circulated the clip around the CNN push back on him about he was speaking with a right-wing revisionist who happened to be an Indian from India, and he was trying to recast what happened, what African Americans' role was in the Civil War and what we were fighting for, and it was really a ridiculous position that this guy was putting forth. And
This guy's running for president.
I don't know if that guy's running for president. He was
The Indian?
Yeah. It's not like, I don't think he's running for president, because only Indian I know running for president is the female, Nikki Haley from South Carolina. But he was, I believe he had a book or something, but the ideas he was pushing forth were ridiculous. And I felt like, Don Lemon should have pushed back from that.
What was the argument? Do you
The
remember?
argument was that it was about Second Amendment, First Amendment, what we were fighting for during the war. It was so ridiculous, I can't even recall the specifics of it, but I recall Don Lemon was, totally right about that. So, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him, as Graham mentioned that after with Utrice Lee, she sort of disappeared because she left the New York area and she went to D.C. Although I was not for what happened, what she was part of at WBAI before she left, and the changing of that guard in that situation. But it's just so sad to hear, that this is what's happening with her. And I don't think that's going to happen with Don Lemon. I don't know what's going to happen with him, but as we talked about news now, it's so controlled by these forces, then even if you have a moderate position, you can't find your way onto a larger network for long.
Yeah, this is a part of media, the dangers of media. You see the people that follow Fox News. I talk with people across the country, and they're totally oblivious as to the character of Donald Trump. And I had to fill them in on his history in New York City. And they're just looking at the fact that he was on TV, which gives no credence to an individual just because they had a television show, that they should be the president of the United States. You know, and this is the danger of media, because it takes people's minds, and people fail to think, as Doc says, they fail to think analytically or critically, but they believe everything they see. Oh, this was on Facebook, this was on TikTok, and they believe, and they get their news from these feeds. You know, you don't get any international news in this country, so freedom of the press is a joke.
Yep.
I don't care if you're watching CNN or MSNBC or Fox, they're not giving you news. They're regurgitating the same thing every hour after. It's just a different host coming to the microphone.
And Graham, in your travels, you might notice that they don't show the same. CNN might show their audiences in Europe a different news than they show in the United States. They're not showing us the same thing.
Most certainly. You know. Al Jazeera. If you want to know what's going on in the motherland, you have to go to Al Jazeera. You're not going to get any information. It took a long time before they even discussed recently the civil war going on in the Sudan. So
that's been going on for quite a while.
Long time. And I was shocked
20
that
years.
I saw it on, I think it was MSNBC last week. But you have to go to Al Jazeera or the BBC if you want to know what's going on in the world. You're not going to get it from the American news outlets, not until it becomes some major issue, or unless it's the Ukraine.
Let's bring it home. We got to concentrate on how we're dealing with each other. And all these heroes that we're talking about came up in a different era, and our youth here, Cinque, had the benefit of knowing these elders.
Yeah, been
Now, people your age and younger, what are we doing for each other as far as your age group is concerned?
Well, I'll say it's different now because, as Graham mentioned, the way people get news, the way people interact, and before, you know, news was more concentrated. You probably had 3 major networks. Now people have thousands, literally, of stations. They have these podcasts. Everybody thinks they're a news person. Everybody, all you need is a computer and a little hookup. And if you pay for your ad to place in a search engine, people will find you. If you got a nice, pretty looking set, you can get on there and spout all sorts of ridiculous stuff. You might have 300,000 followings, and you don't know anything. You can barely read. In fact, you don't read. You just go off a lot of gossip, and he say, she say. You don't know what a primary source is, but you're out here in front leading people. They call you an influencer or things like that. So it's all changed. And then you also have places like Facebook and these other platforms. They work off an algorithm. You're only seeing things that agree with you. You could have 1,000 friends. You're only going to be seeing things from about 40 of them. You know, so even which everything gets constrained in more and more. It doesn't really allow people to grow anymore, you know, because of technology. And now what we're having happen in the latest thing is AI. You can't even tell the pictures are real anymore. There was a picture of LeBron James that was just posted up with him and all this. It never happened. It's not him. But the AI is so seamless, it looks real. And it's really hard to tell. You could create a whole story behind it. They even have artists for music. If you pick up the phone nowadays, you got to be careful not to say hello, because sometimes it's a scammer trying to get a voice print on you. Next thing you know, they like, Winston, we've got Beverly over here. And they got her voice on there. And they're like, Winston, come get me. It's not her. It's but she picked up the phone, and they got a voice track print. It's so many things to worry about with the way technology is moving. With a lot of it's not really full artificial intelligence. It's what we call machine learning, and it's aggregating congregate data. I could show you a video now if people don't know. Machine learning is teaching people. You could take a picture of your refrigerator, and then you put it into that. What can I make from this? And then they'll pull you a recipe off the internet. This is what you can make with what you have in your refrigerator. So it's showing you you taking a picture of what's in your refrigerator, right? And you say such and such. You tell the AI, chatbot, whatever, and you say, give me some recipes I can make. You took a picture of everything in there, and it'll turn up 7 recipes for you. And you know, basically a lot of things that people were doing, machines are going to be doing. What you're going to school for now, you're not going to be doing. It's already bad now. 70% of the workforce is not doing things they went to school with. So
Yeah.
this generation coming out is going to be about 95. You know, school is just going to be a place for you to go in debt because your job, you're not going to be doing that. Because it's just everything is changing so fast. So, I mean, I think it's an advantage if you know how to get primary sources on things. You can cut to the truth and things like that, because these skills that you guys grew up on, they're going to be lost very soon, because learning, deciding what's real and what's fake is going to be a big deal. Even when we talk about, you know, my uncle who was a photographer, they're taking a photographer's work now and they're layering it and they're creating a whole new image, and photographers won't get credit. It's AI. So this whole world is changing very rapidly. So a lot of times young people who might be great in a old world that didn't exist have different challenges, and they won't, you know, they may not, it's not as easy to be great now with so much other technology to deal with, and this is where the future of things is going.
Yeah. Even
So
one thing
we're-
I don't like is Amazon, because that's putting people out of work. That corporation itself is shutting down small businesses.
Yep.
And community business. So unless everybody wants to deliver packages,
Yep.
because that's what you'll be relegated to,
Yeah.
because your local stores won't exist.
Yeah.
And people have gotten lazy. Oh, I can order it, I can order it, I can order it, and just sit back. Well, you're gonna have a problem down the road. And this guy, Elon Musk, is a problem.
Yep.
Because he's South African.
Yep.
He's out of the mindset of the apartheid system.
Definitely.
So be careful.
Yeah.
Because people are feeding into their own demise.
I
Yeah.
have forgotten that.
And he got Twitter
I have forgotten that.
without even using
Yeah.
his own money, and he's running it into the ground.
Well, he doesn't need those people.
Yeah.
He doesn't need the people. He can run Twitter with about 40 or 50 people, I was told. I was talking to a guy in tech yesterday, and what you said about AI is very true. There is, I can't remember the name of it, but there is also
You talking about Chat GPT?
AI. Chat, yeah, what is
Yeah.
it, G?
Chat GPT, yeah.
GPT, right? So
Yeah.
I just started reading on that this week. And man, people are not going to be working. Young people are not going to be working if you're not up on the tech. But the bad thing is that there's also AI which can decipher what you're reading and other sources coming to you. It can break it down and tell you whether it's AI or it's truly written by another human being. So the power of these computers and the technology is unbelievable.
Yeah. But that also causes more imperialism by the United States, because a lot of the resources they often getting from Africa, so they need to control that part of the globe, as you mentioned with Sudan. But neither of those factions that are warring right now are really good. You know what I mean? If we look into the history of who's financing each side, there's no heroes, you know, involved. Everything's a war for resources and control.
Yeah.
You know, and
It always has been.
yeah, I mean, but at least sometimes you would have, when we look at guerrilla movements, if we look at, say, for example, Zimbabwe, you know, especially during Robert Mugabe, that was ZANU-PF, that was the people, you know. Then you had a British MDC with Morgan Shangarai and people like that. You know, that was the British, and that was outside forces. And you knew the ZANU-PF, Robert Mugabe, that was on the ground, that was liberation forces. But now when you look at conflict and in-flight, and none of you're not seeing either side who are really for the people at times. You know, everybody, they're out to control resources to give to parse out the U.S., China, and other, you know, European nations, etc. So it's just a lot trickier now. You know, before I could say whether it's Zimbabwe, whether it's Namibia, you know, with SWAP or whoever, you know, it's easy to determine who were the good guys and the bad guys. Nowadays, not so clear.
China
Ukraine
is literally raping the African continent, unlike the Europeans were ever able to do.
Well, you have to realize the Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And they were supplying
Yeah.
grain to Africa, right?
They
Well,
were
I mean,
supplying grain, yes,
they were
but the thing that China is doing, they're taking the minerals out of Africa.
Oh,
And the
always.
Africans are not astute with regard to their resources. And the Chinese are also cutting down rare woods to make materials. And you look at the animals that have been slaughtered by Africans to get paid by the Chinese. Rhino horns and all of this stuff. We need good, educated leadership. And with the e-vehicles now, lithium is the new gold.
yeah, lithium is one
Well,
of those resources.
how many
That's the new
years did
goal.
we spend on talking about coltan?
That's
Which
right.
goes in
Yep.
every computer to lower the heat.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you can pick it out of the mud. We spent 16 years talking about the Congo.
Mm-hmm. Patrice Lumumba.
All right. Well, let's run your uncle.
Okay.
Play this last one, number 1, or is it item 2? Item 2.
Item 2, Kwame Brathwaite.
Kwame.
This week we highlight another life well lived. When Rihanna launched her Fenty Maison fashion line in 2019, the superstar announced the news on social media with a vintage photograph and the caption, Kwame Brathwaite Archive. That post sent millions of fans searching for information about the man who had inspired Rihanna. Brathwaite was an iconic New York City photographer who documented the Black is Beautiful movement of the 1960s and 70s. Born and raised in New York, the son of immigrants from Barbados, Brathwaite began taking pictures at a young age and developing them in a makeshift darkroom in his Harlem apartment while attending the prestigious School of Industrial Art. His first subjects were the legends of New York's moody clubs, including Miles Davis and Nina Simone. In 1956, Brathwaite and his brother formed the African Jazz Art Society and Studio. Brathwaite's defining work, though, came with his photographs of black women in their natural beauty, highlighted by the so-called Grandassa models. One of them, named Sikolo, would become his wife of 57 years. In 1962, Brathwaite organized Naturally 62, a landmark event celebrating black culture and beauty. He went on to take now famous photographs of the Jackson Five in Africa, Muhammad Ali and George Foreman at their legendary Rumble in the Jungle fight, and Nelson Mandela at his 1994 inauguration, among many others in his prolific portfolio. Kwame Brathwaite, the groundbreaking photographer who reminded the world that black is beautiful, died last weekend in New York. He was 85 years old.
Yep.
Beautiful.
3 years.
My family is
3
Brathwaite.
years.
I have Brathwaites in my family.
Yeah, that's because you also a Bayesian.
That's right.
It's one of the most popular names in Barbados is
That's
Brathwaite.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody wasn't born in Harlem, Winston.
Well, we got the better part of it. We got Harry.
You know.
We got Harry.
Yeah.
He got to be
Bra-
96.
Look, Brathwaite and Braithwaite, so B-R-A-T-H,
right.
yep. Because if you ever go to the 2nd Avenue train station, you see the George Braith. He's really George Braithwaite. He
Braithwaite.
shortened it, just like my father went from Cecil Brathwaite to Elambe Brath. And my uncle was originally born, Ronnie Brathwaite, even though that Ronnie's really his middle name, but he was always Ronnie, and then he changed to Kwame. But he kept the Brathwaite, where my uncle and my father annexed it, annexed off the whole weight, and just went with Brath. But you know, the thing about
But talk about the style and the
style.
quality of life that we lived in those days.
well,
Most people your age don't understand that.
But you know, my friends call me the geriatric whisperer. Because they always say I know a lot of old people. But really what it was I was around my father and uncle more than anybody else. I traveled different countries with them and everything. And, you know, when my uncle capturing all of these photos of people. And, you know, I just, from young, I just took an interest in what they were doing. Like, I can remember
you had to take an interest.
Well, in a way, I sort of took an interest in my uncle's photography. Really what happened one day, if you remember at one time, and Graham probably knows the year, when they started bringing all these theme restaurants to New York, you had Planet Hollywood, you had then you had Motown, I forget the one with Stallone. You had all these theme restaurants. Then they did the Motown Cafe. And when they debuted the Motown Cafe, every photo in there was my uncle's photo. So I remember going to the groundbreaking of that. And I'm seeing Boyz II Men, I'm seeing Jackson 5, I'm seeing all of these Motown artists that he'd taken pictures of over the years. And he was, every photo in here had his signature on it. And it was the
people don't
groundbreaking
understand how expensive it was to be a photographer back
because
then.
photography was real back then. You had to have a dark room, etc. You know, that goes into the history of AJAZ, African Jazz Art Society and Studio. AJAZ originally was formed, AJAZ started out called Jazz Art Studio, right? In 1956, formed at 751 Kelly Street in the Bronx, where my grandparents lived. Then in 1959, they had the convention to abrogate the term Negro. So they changed the name from Jazz Art Society to African Jazz Art Society. They didn't become studio technically, even though they are flyers that they put the other S on in around late 59. But the studio came because they moved to Harlem, 125th Street, right? The Apollo Theater was the landlord. You know, 243 West 125th Street gave them a lot of access also to entertainers and people having the Apollo as your, you know, Apollo Theater as your landlord. But that's really what the creation of that brought my uncle into getting access was the Grandassa models. So my father came up with the idea of the Grandassa models in 1961. They debuted it later on, a few months later, at the Purple Manor in Harlem in January 28th, 1962. That's when the Grandassa models debuted, and they really took the country by storm. You know, and they was inspired really by, my father had also been in another organization during the same time. Him and my uncle were, had founded AJAZ. They were part of AMPM, which was Carlos Cook's African Nationalist Pioneer Movement. And so they had really first started the thing.
Last 20 seconds.
The last 20 seconds, well,
the God in me loves the God in you. Stay
There it
tuned for more talk about ancient history. And how proud we are to have lived this long and be black and sane. I mean, if you can live through the American dream and survive being sane, you've accomplished something.
Right.
Cinque, you really need to do